because you need to up.
Oh, it's not. Okay.
No.
Oh, hi. Okay.
Okay, so now we're live. Woohoo! Okay.
Yay.
Yeah, so apparently you have to up your prescription. Your subscription. Oh my gosh, I might need to up my prescription.
Sometimes a good idea.
Yes. So it doesn't show me so far. There may be it does show me that I am the viewer. Okay. All right. So I think that we should just have our conversation and play with this live thing.
Okay.
And then whoever joins us, and whoever doesn't. Yeah. Okay. All right. So you have your book. Do you have your book?
No.
Okay.
I left it next door.
Okay. So
that's okay. I can go get it.
You don't need your book because I wasn't going to read from it, but I know that you want to talk about which ones are our favorites.
Yeah. And I should have brought my book.
Yeah. No, that's okay. I wanted to talk about, I know you want to talk about Achilles, so we definitely have to talk about Achilles because it's your boo. And yay! Hi, Sherry. Sherry's here. She says, "Hi, Dr. Carl. I'm here for the first live. Woohoo! Gay gods! Yay! Okay, thank you, Sherry. This is our first time going live, so we're just gonna feel free to pop in the comments anytime. Yeah. So I know that we want to talk about Achilles. I want to talk about Enkidu and Gilgamesh for sure. Poseidon a little bit, and then I wanted to talk a little bit about what you think about the Artemis and Callisto story, stuff like that. Yeah, and anything else that you want to talk about too. That sounds good.
Okay.
Yeah,
great.
So do you want to start with Achilles, since that seems to be people's most loved and also most controversial? Like, yeah. So tell me, I guess one of my things is, maybe we could talk about it. Like, when did you first figure out that they might be lovers? Like, do you remember?
I mean, I feel like I always knew they were lovers. I mean, so I grew up in a very, I guess, progressive neighborhood. So when I first found out about like my two male neighbors being a couple, and they were like old men. So like probably the age I am now. When I was a child. So, I mean, I always knew gay and lesbian adults when I was a kid.
Right.
So I don't know. I never had like a aha moment, but I remember being really mad when the movie Troy came out that Patroclus was his cousin.
Yes.
I just was like, that is so lame.
Yes.
Which I'm not supposed to say now.
Yes. For me, it never occurred. Okay, so when I read the Iliad when I was younger, I was always like, it doesn't make sense to me that Achilles is so devastated over Patroclus. Like, there was something that was like very clearly, when Homer is writing, it's very clear that there's something about Patroclus that Achilles is like obsessed, But it wasn't until I was older, when I can't remember if it was one of my courses or whatever, when someone had said, well, they're lovers. And I thought, oh my God, yes, they're lovers. This makes sense. Because I was like, cousin, really? Like, Achilles is so like, so I think that sometimes we don't think lovers right away, because I don't think we're raised with making that association, or at least I wasn't raised with making that. And then you feel like that association is like, maybe you're projecting, right? Like, maybe. And so, yeah. And so then when I did more and more research, and you kind of take it line by line, and you kind of look at it, and there's people that spend their whole lives like looking at Achilles' relationship with all the people in the book versus Patroclus, when it's very clear, like,
yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I was trying to figure out if I had already read The Song of Achilles when the movie came out, but I think the movie came out before Song of Achilles.
Yes.
So, I mean, that was I think that book, so many people love that book because the relationship between them is so fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I mean, I feel like the only controversy I have with Achilles is, the old, like, is it better to die young and live forever in glory, or live to be old and forgotten? Like, that's the only controversy I see there, because for me, it's always been like unquestionable that they were lovers.
Right. Right.
So I think we read the Odyssey in high school instead of the Iliad.
Mm.
So I guess I kind of just missed out on that part. But the thing is, when you're reading those stories, there are so many pieces that you're like, what? Like, the motivation is so unclear in some parts.
Yes, I agree. I mean, now I know that the Greeks would have known what the relationship was like that.
Mm-hmm.
So like I say to my students, like, when we say Netflix and chill, right? Or we used to say it, I don't know, maybe it's like 5 years old now, 10 years old now. Uh, but when we say it, or we text it, or we write it down, and we're like, oh yeah, Joe and Schmo, or Netflix and chilling, we know what that means. It's implied, it's
Mm-hmm.
very clear. But if somebody in 1,000 years now goes, well, look, they were just Netflix and chilling,
Oh my
they're
God. I
right.
love that. I love that comparison.
You won't get it, and they'll have the same debate. They'll be like, no, they weren't lovers. They just sat around watching TV,
Chilling.
Right? Exactly. Like, look at the words. The words say chilling, So I always tell them, like, this is the way you have to read Greek plays, and even Greek myth and Greek stories, or any stories really. Because the audience is like it's like when you watch Seinfeld. When I try to get my parents to watch Seinfeld, they don't get it. They're like, why is that funny? I don't get it, because you don't get the humor. You have to know social context, right? You have to know the implications. You have to know popular culture. And so I think it would have been very clear for the audience,
Mm-hmm.
especially with Achilles, like ripping his hair out and crying for Patroclus, and then, going after, what's his name, Hector, and just setting off. Like, I think it would have been very clear to the audience that this relationship was an intimate one.
Well, I think, the word companion probably made it really clear to the audience as well. Whereas to us, we're like, oh, especially through like a Victorian lens, like that means they're friends, like
they're very best friends.
His like sworn companion. It's like that was probably super clear to the audience back then.
Right. That's right.
Yeah. So, I mean, I just feel like, for me, Achilles is such a compelling character, just because he's like both things in many different ways. It's like he has this opportunity to be this famous hero. I mean, he doesn't really have a choice, but he kind of has a choice. But we like to think about that choice.
Right.
Especially as we age sometimes.
Right.
And then also, like, he's, Patroclus is his sworn companion, but then that doesn't mean that he's necessarily like not into women at all.
Because he clearly is. Yes. I also think that threw people, especially early classicists, for a loop, because he does have intimate relationships with women and supposedly children and things like that. So I think a lot of people were very like, well, this is very clear cut, cis or not.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, that's the thing. One of the things I love about the ancient world is the sexual fluidity, and how it's like, you don't have to assume, it's not heteronormative as an assumption.
Right.
It's like, yeah, you will reproduce, but that doesn't mean that you're what we would call straight.
Yes. Yes.
Like,
I agree. Yes.
And like a different way of thinking than now.
Right. I see that Sherry's talking about, I only see Brad Pitt, which is funny. Actually, in that movie Troy, because I didn't like Achilles for a long time either. Okay, as a historian, because he's kind of like a bit douchey, and like he's a little arrogant,
and he sulks all the time.
He sulks all the time. And it's true that when I saw Brad Pitt playing him, I always pictured Achilles like bigger, balder, meaner looking, And then when I saw Brad Pitt playing him, I thought, oh, well, I could see why maybe some people might like it. Like, there's something about that allure. So like, sort of, I don't know, Europeanly or Westerny sort of good looking. But there's
Yeah.
something about it. Doesn't matter whether he was looking like Brad Pitt or just whatever was handsome at the time. But there's something about handsomeness that I think would have made him even more dangerous.
Right. Well, I mean, I feel like only seeing Brad Pitt isn't the worst thing in that role anyway. Like, I mean, especially when he like lifts the sword to kill somebody and you see his thigh under the leather skirt, which I think I really like. But I mean, he does a good job because he does really seem like this amazing golden boy who, who's like fantastic. And then, so it would have been so great if he had been able to have a relationship with Patroclus instead of calling him his cousin.
Yeah.
That would have made the movie.
Yeah. Because in the movie, I know I pictured larger thighs. Yes. Yes. In the film, like two things that bothered me about the film. First was Cassandra. And I watched this film a long time ago, so you guys might know it better than me, but I know that they somehow make Cassandra irrelevant in the whole thing, and I love Cassandra. And when I do this thing next week about Apollo, I'm gonna be harping on Cassandra and all that because she got shifted so hard by Apollo. And then the Bryce's situation too. Is it Cassandra or Bryce's that he sleeps with in the movie?
It's Bryce's.
It's Bryce's. So they move his passion away from obviously Patroclus and into Bryce's and create this, like, she was my trophy and now I get to win her or have her or whatever, which I thought was a little bit like I don't remember Patrick. Oh yeah, I remember him a little bit in the movie. Yeah. It's too bad that this is my problem with Hercules too, because Hercules is famous for having male lovers, and in every Hercules movie I've never seen him have at least one male lover. Like, he cries for a bunch of men, he has a bunch of lovers. Of course, he also is said to have sex with 500 women in one night. I mean,
that's some stamina.
But never do I see this intimate like relationship which are very clearly written in the stories. So it's not like for Hercules, it's clearly written in the stories that he has love. It never makes it in Hollywood. Never,
I mean, it doesn't surprise me, sadly, but because
sorry, go ahead.
Oh, because we like, if he has one male lover, it like confuses people.
Yeah.
It has in the past. Maybe in the future, people, are starting to be more open-minded and like more fluid in their thinking.
Yeah.
The younger generation anyway.
I hope so, because I think that's one of my biggest pet peeves. And that's why I like doing this, and it's fun because it's like the story's already written. It's already there. So all you have to do is take it and just, create something. But I mean, like if we think about Game of Thrones or like big box office movies and hits or HBO or whatever, where there are intimacies, let's say queer intimacies under the umbrella, you would think that Hollywood would go, oh, look at that. Game of Thrones has a bunch of complex and controversial relationships. You would take mythology then and go, well, let's do that, the real story. But I think people have like attached themselves to mythology in such a way that they're like, no, don't take my Hercules, like don't take my Achilles.
Right. I think that, I mean, one of the things I love about Greek mythology is how there could be so many versions and so many retellings. But I think like the problem is a lot of people think about the truth and that there's only one version. And the thing is, the myths, there were never only one version. There were always multiple versions for most of them.
Yeah.
So it's like they're flexible, and I love seeing them reinvented and recreated.
Yeah. And we've talked about this because you write historical fiction, which I love. And we've talked about like people's reaction to historical fiction, because there's kind of these two schools of thoughts where there's like people that are like, oh, you're not doing it traditionally exactly like how it's been done for 500 years. And I think that, stories were meant to be told, right? And retold. And retold. And then as you traveled from village to village, you would have to edit this in and take this out, and reshape the story, and nobody cared, So I'm all for creating stories, like being flexible around stories. Yes, you still have to do a bit of history, but you could be a bit flexible.
Mm-hmm.
And so we'll see how that's going to be received, because now I feel like since the Song of Achilles and a few, it feels like there's a lot of the same sort of stories being retold, or the same tone maybe.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that was the thing that excites me about it, is like seeing them from different perspectives, and like Pat Baker's the song, or Barker's Song of the Girls, or the, what is it called? The Silence of the Girls. It's
Oh,
like it's about Achilles, but it's told from, I think, Breeze's point of view, and she
oh,
hates him.
wow.
And
Oh, wow.
it's like, and he's just this murderer. And I'm all for it. Like, I think it's great, and I also like all these different versions.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I feel like seeing them from different perspectives is really interesting.
Yeah, yeah. And I agree with you, because even if, let's say, this was a real story, which we still don't know it is, whether or not it is, there would have been people all around him that had different perspectives of his story. So
Yeah.
that would be really wonderful to have. Yeah, that's fantastic. No, I hadn't heard of that book. That's really good.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, yeah. Yay, Achilles. Um, let's do, what do you want to do next? Which
I'm
one of the stories?
open. I am open.
Uh, okay, let's do Artemis and Callisto,
Okay.
because I need a minute to to
I
wind.
I listened to your podcast today
Yeah, the
about
one
that.
about Artemis and Callisto.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Sorry, go ahead. Go ahead.
So I learned about Callisto, and I was like, oh, okay. I always say the names of all the gods differently, from Xena Warrior Princess, because she was a character, but she's not Artemis's character, but she's an antagonist of Xena, and she's blonde, and she was like, it was like Xena, when Xena was bad, she destroyed Callisto's village. Now Xena's been redeemed.
Oh,
So that's how I first learned her name. And then later I learned the myth.
well, yay for popular culture. Yay. I mean, that's a pro. I don't remember Callisto. I watched Xena. I need to rewatch that. A few people have DM me and been like, yeah, you need to rewatch Xena again. I think I could do a whole flippin' watch
I
series.
mean,
Like,
it's so weird because it's like Greco-Roman light, like Lite. But yeah, Callisto is like totally her enemy. It's great.
yeah, I love Callisto. First of all, I've always loved her name. Like, I have a thing with her name. And I love bears and the bear constellation, and obviously Artemis and all that. But I've always been puzzled about the story where Artemis. So, two things that puzzle me. Number one, that Zeus thought that by turning into Callisto, he could definitely seduce. I mean, by turning into Artemis, he could definitely seduce Callisto. So I've always thought, like, gay, obs, gay, gay, gay.
Yeah, 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 for
You
sure.
know? And then her reaction, I mean, as a woman who dates women, her reaction, I feel, is so, Artemis's reaction is so like jealous lover. How dare you betray me with a man? Like, I mean, in the community at large, there's a lot of this sort of like, I mean, Artemis, of course, supposedly like goes all the way and kills her and turns her into a constellation. But then I've heard some stories that, and this is what I truly believe, is that Callisto was already a constellation before the Greeks arrived, and she was already a bear before the Greeks arrived. And then they sort of attached these stories of Zeus seducing her and all that kind of stuff to her. That makes more sense to me. But yeah, I found the fact that Zeus transforms into Artemis, because he transforms into everything from a swan to a duck to a golden shower to a, you know, 5,000 things. Uh,
Mhm.
But in this case, he decides to transform into his daughter, which is a bit perplexing and a bit disturbing.
I mean, yeah, if you really think about this story, it's super gross. But
And it's super violent, like in the sense of like once she realizes that it's not Artemis, she's horrified, tries to push him off, and of course then he violates her and impregnates her. Like there just seems to be such a very very patriarchal propriety twist to that
And
story.
also, like, that Artemis is so unforgiving.
Yeah.
It reminds me a bit of Athena and Medusa.
Yes. Yes.
And also, I feel like, the cultural takeaway is like, if you get raped, you're going to be blamed no
Yes.
matter what. Just like so many other things that happen in life. It's like, it's
Yeah.
not your fault, but you die for this. Or
Yes.
yeah,
Yes.
it's pretty harsh. But I mean, yeah, that part where I was looking at one point, it seemed like not every source had him turn into Artemis,
No.
but
Yeah.
because I always thought that was such a great, he should have just stayed in that
Yeah.
form, and,
Yeah.
which I think is how I thought the story actually went, or one of the versions went,
Yeah.
because I think I just like it better. It's like easier to swallow than.
Yeah, but I wonder then if he would have been able, like, so, if he would have been able to impregnate her, which I think is part of the
Right, because
violation.
I was also thinking about how it's like the cultural lesson is like, if you do it one time, you're going to get pregnant, which
Yes.
definitely happens to people.
Yes. And this idea that there's punishment for pleasure, for women, there's punishment for pleasure. Yeah, like there's, the more I think about that myth, I mean, there's other versions that say that Hera then is the one that chases her down and tries to have her destroyed, but there's always another woman, right, that turns against her, and or orders Artemis to have her killed, which is another weird thing for Hera to order Artemis to do. But there's a couple of stories in which Hera does demand Artemis kill people, like a soldier, which is again very, very patriarchal.
Oh yeah, I mean, I can kind of see how Artemis is a weapon, that
That's
she
right.
is responsible for health and death.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah,
crazy.
because even Leto orders her and her brother to kill Niobe's children.
Niobe,
yeah, so they're really like the enforcers, which again, I mean, the problem is, right, that we don't have a lot of the pre-Greek material. We have sort of a Greek interpretation of pre-Greek material, right? But like, yeah, we don't have a lot of that material. Yeah. Slick Dissident loves Hera. Slick Dissident is his name. Yeah, he's a guy that's on the podcast with Juan and I sometimes every now and then. He's amazing, like super, super knowledgeable dude. We're gonna do the torch goddesses who bear torches.
Oh yeah. That sounds
And
really exciting.
yeah, we're gonna do like a 3 people kind of discussion, which is gonna be fun coming up. But yeah, Hera, and Hera, I really didn't like Hera either until I did the research for that last episode. And I was doing a course on her, and yeah, I think one of my courses is on her, like one of the shorter ones. And I was doing a lot of digging into her, and I realized that actually she is one of the original goddesses. And she's one of the original parthenogenetic goddesses. And then I thought, the reason why I don't like her is because she's always portrayed as a nagging wife,
right?
Which is the point of that portrayal. So yeah, I think that Hera is often like they all are, right? They're all rewritten.
Yeah.
Right.
Seen through this patriarchal lens.
Yeah. Yeah. As a writer, now that I'm thinking of just kind of asking, how are you able, like, is that part of your vision when you think about, okay, like you wrote the Ariadne story and you wrote the Zeus and Hera story, like, how did you feel about like patriarchy when you're writing? Like, how are you finding that balance?
I mean, I really want to flip it in a way and write. I mean, with the Minoans, it was like, it felt genuine to write it outside of patriarchy.
Yeah.
But I feel like, I think we talked about how, like, the Robert Graves theory that their wedding night, Hera and Zeus's wedding night, lasted 300 years, because that's how long it took for the patriarchy to take over from like the rule of the goddess. So, I mean, I like to look at them in different ways. and to see how, they might have been as actual characters.
Yeah.
And I mean, it was super hard to figure out how Hera and Zeus could have a relationship that
Right.
wasn't just
like a love relationship.
Yeah, like something that of substance that wasn't
Yeah.
just like he enjoys pissing her off and she enjoys nitpicking at him. Like I wanted something a little bit deeper than that.
Yes. Yes.
Their own
Yes.
complexity of trying to love each other.
Yeah. And what about Zeus himself? I mean, Zeus has a male lover, right? He has Ganymede.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I don't know if we talked about Ganymede. What do you think about? I don't think we've talked about him.
No. I love that is he like one of Jupiter's moons?
Yes.
Or yeah.
I think so. Now he is. Yeah.
I appreciate that.
Yeah. The most handsome man of all of Troy, right? The most handsome man of all, and the Trojans were known to be beautiful, and Zeus falls in love with him.
The most handsome boy of all of Troy.
I mean, he's a prince. Yes.
I like how it's like the major thing you could get your mortal boy lover to do is be your cupbearer.
Right. Right.
Stand there and pour you wine.
Yes.
I mean, you is Poseidon or Zeus in this case.
Because in this case, Zeus transforms into an eagle, comes down into the battlefield, picks up Ganymede, and takes him with him, and we have this image in some stories of his dog barking after him, like, no.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So like Zeus, like, as he always does, he takes his lover, he takes young Ganymede. Sorry, that's the car. And then Calamax says, because I have it in front of me, he says that the pair flew to Mount Olympus, where Zeus kept the blonde prince for his beloved and took him to his bed.
Yeah.
I mean, I know people sometimes are like, oh, you always got to turn mythology into like queer or gay or whatever. But I mean, this is in the book.
Yeah.
The story is there.
Yeah, the bigger question is, why did they have to make it seem so straight and white? I mean, I know the answer, but like I feel like that's the question that I have is, it's not a question because I know the answer, but like let's take it back to how it was originally and look at it within its own context.
Yeah.
Like you were talking about earlier.
Yeah. Yeah. Because I mean, here it's very clearly stating Zeus fell in love with him. Zeus picks him up off the battlefield. He becomes the cupbearer. He takes him to bed. I mean, there's no doubt about that. And then for the kidnapping, he gives him some magic horses. He goes, oh, sorry, I kidnapped you and I turned you into my lover. Here's some magic horses and immortality. You'll be my cupbearer for whatever. And he's the only one of his lovers that he makes immortal. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, very clear that there's like a favoritism happening here.
Yeah. That's really interesting.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and also it's kind of like, Hera can't have the same kind of jealousy.
Right.
Maybe.
Yeah. Maybe.
That's like a whole another theory and discussion, but in some ways.
Yeah. I mean, we know that Aristotle said, we have sex with women for procreation and with men for intimacy and eroticism. So I think that would have been, I mean, I know that was quite in the community and in the social structure, but I think that, yes, I think you're right. That would have been acceptable to Hera because this is like, well, this is your lover boy, your distraction, but it's not someone that replaces me.
Right.
So I think that would have been acceptable. My biggest pet peeve, I think, is that we don't have enough of women's love stories with each other.
Mm-hmm.
Like, first of all, because men are writing the stories, they're not interested in women's stories.
Yeah.
Unless, like, it's, again, stories of submission and things like that. So that kind of irks me. I know that there were a lot of women's writers in the ancient world that we don't have. Mm-hmm. So who knows what a lot, but, many. Who knows what they wrote about? Would have given us insight. Yeah.
Right.
But I guess the fact that men are writing about men's lovers makes it sort of undeniable that this was very normalized.
Yeah, and I mean, I feel like, men, especially because didn't the Greeks think about like penetration, phallic penetration as
Yep.
sex? So I feel like, we can, I feel fine assuming that there are many women lovers,
Yeah.
that was like totally normal.
Yeah.
And it just wasn't recorded to the same degree that
Yeah.
boy God relationships were.
Yeah. No, I agree. And I think it's because of exactly like you say, because the Greeks had this idea of the penetrator versus the penetratee, which is a way to say it, I guess. And even though there were romantic and love relationships, but it's like they were really, especially the writers, they really saw this as a dominant submissive relationship. And I think for women, because there was no such penetration, they sort of thought, well, I mean, that's like fluff, you know. So I think you're right.
And I think also generally, like if a woman had a female lover, but she still had a husband and could still provide him with children, it was like whatevs,
Yeah.
It wasn't the same kind of threat as a male lover who could, have his child carry the name or the line. So
That's right. That's right.
but yeah, like I sent you the image of the gravestone I saw in the Athens Archaeological Museum of two women, and the placard said, it's like, we don't know what the relationship was between these two women. And it's like two women who are showing like they're both showing jewelry boxes to each other, which seemed like a big status thing in this crazy grave section of the museum.
Yes.
And it was so funny because it was like, maybe she's a servant, but all the other servants were like this little and like very clearly, a servant. But these are like two women who are like, this was her beloved who made a gravestone for her. And whoever wrote the placard was like, friends.
Very best friends.
Yeah. And I was just like, and there was this other one that got blurry that I sent you. There was like two priestesses sitting like really close together on the throne. I was like, these relationships have been there in plain sight all along, but they've been interpreted as like, well, we just aren't sure what their relationship was, or maybe she's her servant, or, cousins or whatever.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I saw something recently. I think I was going to post that. I saw something recently that has two women. It's unclear from what I can see. It almost looks like there's some very clear oral sex happening. And it says one of the few piece artifacts in which two women are having sex, like one of the rarest or whatever, because we don't have a lot of this imagery. And so I think it's very, and I think it says something. I'm going to have to post it. I don't know how to share a screen on this StreamYard, but not yet. But it said something like, this might have been a topic that people enjoyed in the ancient world, or something that people enjoyed looking at in the ancient world. And I thought, oh my God. Well, nothing has changed, has it?
Right. Well, that reminds me, I read one time on Twitter, I read this whole thread about analingus in the medieval world, and how it was just kind of like so normal, like that people like weren't even fazed by it.
Yes.
And like it was like some doodle in the side of a illuminated manuscript or something, and it was just like, the thing that's the norm doesn't really get talked about or brought up. That's and right. So it's really interesting how different, time periods and groups of people practice different sexual acts. It's also interesting, like we think about, every historical figure as like more of a prude or whatever. And it's like, no, it's actually us that's really.
Yes. 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 I was going to say that it feels almost like the last couple of 100 years have totally like, put on that chastity belt, like on us. We tend to think we're progressive. We're like, oh yeah, where we've got all these sort of things coming out and coming up and all these kinds of things. And then you can look back and you go, well, actually the ancients were, this didn't even faze them. They did the most kinkiest stuff in relationships, or they had the most interesting relationships, or try relationships, 18 people in a whatever, all these kinds of things,
Exhausting.
I don't know, maybe they didn't have Netflix, so then they could just.
That's true, but they knew how to chill.
Yeah, like I think it's so, and I think that people are sometimes, not all people, I mean, I think there's a lot of people that already kind of know this stuff, but I am finding that there are people that are still coming on going, no, like, or someone had DM me and said something like, oh, why do you have to make everything gay or something like that? Like, why do you have to, and I thought to myself, but I'm not making it. I'm just talking about it, and every ancient historian, and certainly classicist, knows about it. They just don't want to talk about it. It's not like it's secret or hidden.
Well, and I think it's also helpful for people who are, not only attracted to the opposite gender or whatever. Like, it's helpful to know that, like, Alexander the Great had a lover and Achilles had a lover. And, like, it's helpful to know that, like, I mean, I think that there are kids in really isolated communities that are made to feel really bad about super normal feelings. And I think that it's important to make everything gay.
I think you're absolutely right, and I think it answers the question. I get a lot from even people around me who, like my family, some of them are quite conservative. We're like, why is everything gay now? And I'm like, well, actually, if we go back in it's like it's always been this way. It's just that there wasn't this label. There wasn't this category.
Well, and there was so much oppression as well. I mean, yeah, I did read this one book and it was talking about like the labeling, like being like, we don't have any homosexuals here, but yeah, those two guys are lovers and live together. It's like we don't have a word for it, but we still do it.
That's right.
That's right. I feel like it's definitely important to talk about, but yeah, a lot of people, so I have a 12-year-old and it's really interesting to like see how her generation deals with genders and pronouns, and it's amazing. It's fantastic. It's like, and I mean, I'm like, okay, they want to be called they, and it's just hard for my brain, but I support them, but grammatically it's difficult. And I realized it's like a way for them to show their respect to each other as well.
Right.
And I was just like, it's really fascinating to watch.
Yeah.
And it's like my daughter and her friends, like a lot of her friends are bi, and it's so cool. It's just like, and she actually told me last night she was texting with this guy who she's been basically ghostwriting his relationship texts with she's been ghostwriting both sides. And she said something to him about being bisexual, and he was like, wait, you like girls? You're gay. And she's like, no, I like boys too. And he's like, but you're gay. And like, she went over it with him I'm like, I appreciate all the work she's doing for this.
Yeah.
But it's just so incredible to see this new I mean, I know it's not like that for all kids. And I know there are like, she's already dealt with plenty of homophobes, but like most of the kids that I've seen in her generation, like they just seem to get it and be fine with it. And it's not like a big issue, at least in my part of the world.
Yeah. I mean, I think maybe for young people it's harder to see how much things have changed. But I guess we can see it. My daughter literally says, "I love with my heart." Oh, Sherry, I love that. I love that. Yeah, I love that. And I feel like that. So I played roller derby for a really long time. And roller derby was famously sort of labeled a lesbian sport, right? Because all the women who are in, and it's kind of funny when I think about Artemis and Callisto, because it is true that we were all messing around with each other. No one really talked about it. Certainly no one wrote about it. And there were a variety of representations of femme and non-femme, but like there was just everything. And players just did whatever they wanted. And when I think about that, I think about how those stories aren't told, and nobody, there wasn't even really like a an official anything,
Mm-hmm.
and so that reminds me of groups of women and things like that. And I have friends who like play women's soccer and women's hockey, and there's inevitably some type of love affairs that happen on women's teams all the time, which is wonderful. But we used to have a saying in roller derby, like everybody's born bisexual, and the rest is choice, kind of thing. And that used to like irk people. They used to cause controversy every now and then, but it was based on this idea that every time women join our teams, inevitably, even the most cis women would fall in love with some other woman. And so it led to this idea, but yeah, like I love the idea of just loving somebody because, yeah, you just love them, and that leads to some type of intimacy, sure. And I think that this generation is a lot more open to that, way more open than when I was a kid. I wouldn't say bisexual when I was a kid.
Well, I mean, I feel like I definitely was having feelings at a time of bisexual erasure, because like I was living in San Francisco, and being bi-curious meant like I'm not ready to fully come out yet. So like nobody thought it was real to be bisexual.
Right.
They thought it was just some like bullshit thing. So it's really great to have a time of such like flexible thinking for some people. Certainly not enough people, but
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One of the other things I was thinking when I was listening to you talk about Artemis and Callisto is how like Artemis's group was just so outside of society, and how that was like so special that she was allowed that. It's like to not have to fulfill those traditions that were obligatory basically to everybody else to marry and procreate.
To not have to center men, really. I've been thinking about this idea of centering of men for a long, long time. And I never thought of it like that, like centering. I always think like, words like you put people ahead of you, or you're a people pleaser. I was used to those words. And now suddenly, women are talking about centering men. And I thought, oh my God. And then when I was thinking about Artemis, just in the woods with her girlfriends, whether they're intimate or not, I thought, yes. So you don't have to do anything in which the man is, so you don't have to procreate. You don't have to marry. You don't have to cook. Maybe they did.
Well, somebody had to cook.
Right. Like you don't have to do things, right? I think Artemis was really living the dream. She really, and this is, I mean, in part, this is also why I love her so much. And she's just such a gift that keeps on giving, because it's like her stories, let's say, were around, 2, 3, 4, 5,000 years ago. And yet throughout that whole time, she remained a sovereign deity, let's say, right? She is a sovereign deity, but she remained a sovereign. So she was never married off. I know she was kind of given to Apollo a little bit as a sister, but she always had her women around. She was always she was able to maintain that. And it's fascinating to me because I don't know why or how. I don't know if it was just, she just slipped through the cracks, or if women were so attached to her worship that they wouldn't let go. How did they not
conquer her?
Yeah.
Yeah, because she was like off in the forest, not causing too much trouble.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe.
And also, I mean, I know that there are other goddesses that are responsible for childbirth, but it's such a scary, complex thing. Maybe they didn't want to mess with it.
True. Yeah. Yeah.
And it's, I mean, also like that women's realm, especially if it comes to like women's medicine, like the patriarch is really freaked out by it.
Yes. Until like the 18th century, when men decided, no, we're going to take over. Yeah.
So I mean, maybe I'm just thinking.
No, I mean, there's no. I think those are really good ideas, because there's no. I mean, you're just seeing it happening, but we don't. And I don't even know if it was consciously happening, because there certainly isn't any like revolutionary piece of writing that says, no, we're not going to give her up. But somehow she made it through.
Yeah, that's a really good point. But also I feel like she didn't really threaten anyone.
True.
because she wasn't trying to take anything. That, I mean,
like from the city states, from the polis.
and
Yeah.
also like, girls would give up their toys to her, whatever, and
Yeah.
then they would go be wives. So
Yes.
they were worshiping her, but still doing the thing that
Yes.
the patriarchy
Yep.
wants.
Yeah. No, I think those are very good points. Yeah, I think those are very good points. I think, yeah. I mean, I think about her in Iphigenia too. I mean, I talked about her in that last episode. And
That
I
was
always
really
find it,
cool.
yeah, I find it really fascinating, that story. I always thought they were lovers,
Mm-hmm.
but I can't tell if it's a mentor-mentee relationship or a lover relationship, because again, we don't know, nothing's written. But Iphigenia feels more real because there's actual small temples near the temples of Artemis. So it feels like a real character, and the priestess would step into that character. Where Callisto, I don't think, is embodied as much in ritual, right?
Right.
So, but again, that's another in close relationship between women that
Mm-hmm.
is vague, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Time is flying. Do you have any other favorites, or do you want to talk about Enkidu and Gilgamesh?
Oh, talk about Enkidu and Gilgamesh.
Yeah.
Because I mean, I know about them, but I think I read Gilgamesh in like 7th or 8th grade.
Yes. So Gilgamesh and Enkidu have been my favorites for a while because, first of all, for a few reasons. Number one, it predates Homer. So that to me is already like, trying to go back to like epic storytelling.
Mm-hmm.
And I read it when I was young, and then I read it in university, and then I teach it in university, and blah, blah, blah. So it's something that constantly comes up, right? As a Sumerian text, as the first epic text of the hero, But my favorite thing is this scene where, Gilgamesh is coming out of the city and Enkidu is coming out of the forest, and they meet just like in this sort of boundary line, like almost like under a gate, right? Where it's like two portals, coming together. And they sort of walk into each other, like, you're walking down the street and someone's walking in your way, and then they kind of try to avoid each other and it doesn't work. And then they end up having this wrestling fight.
Wait, is that the first time they meet?
That's the first time they meet. And they wrestle, So I always try to tell my students, wrestling is code for sex, This is where the Netflix and chill idea comes from. And they're like, no, they're wrestling. I'm like, yes. Two men just don't start wrestling in stories, They don't just meet and start wrestling and then go for a beer afterwards and become best friends like these two.
I mean, they could and have a different kind of friendship.
They could.
They could just be working something else out.
Thank you, Sherry. No problem.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, they have the most interesting relationship. And then the same thing that happens to Achilles later. I mean, I'm cutting the story in like half, whatever. Yeah. But Gilgamesh loses Enkidu, right? Because Gilgamesh and Enkidu go out. They end up killing that bull of Inanna. I think it's Inanna or Ishtar. And anyways, Enkidu loses his life basically because of Gilgamesh's mistake. And then Gilgamesh has this whole like hair pulling, devastation, sadness, just like Achilles. He goes on that immortal quest. And this whole time weeping, crying, or whatever. And so if you think about it, the very first epic story of a hero involves a hero and his lover / best of friends.
Yeah. Sworn companion. I don't know why I love that expression.
And people talk about how they're symbolic, that Gilgamesh represents the city and the rational mind, and Enkidu represents the wilderness. Although Enkidu apparently is a man of the wild until a woman has sex with him and makes him into a speaking human.
Well, we all know this story.
But she enlightens him And then he decides to go and have an affair with Gilgamesh. But I find that people have a very hard time understanding that that's a very intimate relationship.
Mm-hmm.
But what does it say about the fact that one of the very first epic stories that comes out of this,
Well, it's interesting to me as a writer because I'm thinking about the dark moment that like always happens before, the like resolution.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking about like losing Patroclus, losing Enkidu, like that is the dark moment for these characters, and then the resolution happens.
Yes.
I mean, because it's like, it's like the hero suffers a great loss. And
Yes.
this can be a loss of love or a loss of faith or a loss of, a magical ring or whatever. But like, and then, it's like they have to go down before they can go back up.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. I think that's a really, and it's not a surprise to me that men would value losing a man, especially at that time, much more than losing a wife.
Well, also, I mean, like men probably did lose wives a lot more in childbirth.
True.
So I've thought about like, did parents back then like kind of try and temper their love for their baby because they knew that there was a high chance it would die? Did men kind of do that as well?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know, but I've wondered. I mean, I don't even know if that's possible.
That's a really great question, actually. I don't know. I know that there's a lot of stories of the intimacies of men in military and war stories.
Yeah, and you're likely to lose that person as well, but you're also in a more desperate situation yourself.
Yeah, yeah. And so I know, like, for example, with the Spartans and all they encouraged all those love affairs among the Spartans because they would fight together and things like that. But I think that's an interesting point that perhaps they expected, there's a 50-50 chance my wife will die in childbirth. So perhaps there's an expectation there. But I also think like that men intimacy, even just in friendships, they create these bonds. And so, yeah, when that becomes intimate and then you lose that person, it could be really life altering for these stories. And perhaps the audience would have understood that, like the audience listening to those stories.
Yeah.
They certainly understood that wrestling was an intimate body to body activity,
yeah. Well, I mean, the thing is like for the Greeks, wrestling was always oiled and naked. So that's different from like what we might picture as wrestling now.
Yeah. And there are numerous sources that say that it would have been very normal for men to have relationships, pre-game, post-game, in the sense of like creating these bonds and then later having like that would have been just very normal, right? Yeah, so I think that it was a very different kind of society when it came to those intimacies, and we've made it into something like very split,
one either or instead of and both. Yeah.
And perhaps that's what made it so easy to categorize, because there were like cis relationships and non-cis relationships that you could just focus on the cis relationships and ignore the rest. So I'm glad that we get to talk about it, because like I said, like it's not a secret, it's not a conspiracy, it's not like something made up, it's already in the text,
right?
There's a lot of primary sources that are like, yeah, Zeus had this lover, he just picked him off out of the war, he took him up to bed, whatever,
and then paid him in horses. That's really funny. I don't think I knew that part or remembered that part.
Yeah, he paid him in magic horses. Yeah.
I mean, that feels like better compensation than any of the women got.
That's true. And he gave him immortality, right? Same with Poseidon. When Poseidon took up Peplos, he gave him immortality, and that was very clearly his lover. And I mean, that Peplos
story is crazy. I was rereading it. It's just like this.
Oh my gosh,
this poor kid. My God.
Leo is like, that sounds like fun. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, so your father, okay, so the Peplo story, your father's going to cook you. So the father takes Peplo's and makes him into a meal to try and trick the gods to see if the gods could tell the difference between goat meal, goat meat, and
Human flesh, and yeah.
the most random story. And then, of course, they put him back. The gods recognize and put him back together.
In your version, what did somebody eat a piece?
Yes,
And he has a marble shoulder blade. Yeah, okay. That's the story my mom told me when I was a kid.
Demeter wasn't too quick on the take. She was like munching, but they say it's because she was so depressed that Persephone left and was taken, that she ended up eating a piece of the meat. And so yeah, she ate his shoulder. But then imagine, okay, so then they put Peplos back together out of these cooked pieces, which is already kind of weird. But Poseidon falls in love with him.
Actually, it's like the Little Red Riding Hood story where they like cut her and the grandmother out of the wolf.
That's true.
Like fully formed, like or Kronos.
Yeah. Thank you, Connie. Yeah. Or Kronos, like when he's ingesting all his kids and then he's like puking them all up.
I just gave birth to a bunch of Olympians.
Yeah. I found that story so, and it's not the only story in which fathers cook their sons or they cook family members and they try to serve them. Like, again, like a really weird
cautionary tale of what we do not do. We do not cook our children and feed them to the gods.
Yeah. Like really random sort of violent stories that are really weird, but yeah, so he takes Peplos, he falls in love with him, takes him up to Mount Olympus and also gives him immortality and takes him to his bed. Poor Peplos, like, thinking of it in modern terms.
Isn't this the one he also saves the princess whose father is having incest with her?
Peplos does, right?
Yeah.
Yes, later. Yes. So Peplos is able to come down from Mount Olympus, and according to Greek text, he ends up being married and having like offspring and things like that. Yeah.
And that's kind of founding a cursed dynasty.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. So he has, unlike Ganymede, who's up in Mount Olympus forever, he does come in. And I think that's because there's a lot of cities that claim to be from that line. So I think that they were like, yes, we know he's the lover of Poseidon, but he ended up coming and living a mortal life afterwards and things like that. But that story was also kind of like there's okay. If we did an HBO special, we could do like 12 episodes, 15 episodes just on these stories alone. That I think would be fantastic. I mean,
I'm ready to write it. Just tell me who's producing it. Oh, wait, we need to be on strike. I'm not ready to write it.
That's right.
I'm ready to write it, but I won't get paid until after the strike is over.
That's right. Well, okay. So we are down to an hour, my friend. So any last thoughts, ideas, comments?
I just want to say I really appreciated one of the things you said about sexual fluidity and, how it's really important. And actually, I was telling my daughter and her friends about that. I was like, you don't need to decide right now. Like, just don't feel like whoever you are now is who you have to be for the rest of your life.
I love that. And it's funny because I was just talking to a girlfriend today who was saying to me, well, I was a tomboy when I was a kid. And I thought, I was also a tomboy when I was a kid. We don't say that anymore. But and I dressed like a boy and I cut my hair real short. And I think in today's language, maybe I would have been deciding if I'm living, and yet no one, because they use the word tomboy, they were like, oh yeah, she'll grow out of it or it's not or whatever. And then I thought, kids really should get to explore because in a way we kind of were allowed to as women. For boys it was a lot tougher, obviously.
Oh my God,
a lot
because so I'm really thinking a lot about this, about how like women aren't the same kind of threat to I mean, partially because they're just not important enough, but like there's something that about men loving men that has threatened a certain kind of masculinity or patriarchy, or like I don't have the right words to say what I want to say well. But I would like, I feel like women liking other women, or, you know, like women have more ability to dress like a boy than a boy does to dress like a girl.
Absolutely.
I mean, girls have, you know.
Absolutely. And I mean, and the reason for that, and I hate to say that because there are men who support us, but the reason for that is other men, in the sense that men hurt men who are seen as feminine.
Mm-hmm.
And other, like, they, you know, they hurt each other in a sense, and then they hurt women. So there's a type of, that's what we talk about when we talk about toxic masculinity, that there's a type of upbringing, there's a type of environment that produces
so much fear.
Yes, and anger, and sometimes violence, and I think that's a problem. It's a problem for me. Like, it's a problem for me, you know. And I have some of these, what we would call traditional men in my family, who I have often debates with. Oh, why is everybody gay? And why is everybody a they, them? And I sometimes get into a debate, and then I'm like, listen, I get paid to do this, like, at school in gender. I can't be doing this at home too. Like, please. You know,
I think you should just say, just to make your life hard. You know, they're just doing it to bother you.
Like, it's just, I want to have a conversation where we can understand each other. But because of that, I think mentality is very hard to break through. It's like, no, I want to talk to you so that I can show you why I'm right. Right. And so that it becomes,
they just want to complain.
And they're good. Like, they're good people. Like, they have good hearts. But in this particular issue, and so I hope that we can keep talking about it, I guess. And, you know,
right. I mean, just bringing it up, like, creates a lot of room for kids that were super marginalized before.
Yeah.
And adults too, of course.
And adults too. Yeah. 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 Well, thank you so much for coming.
I always love talking to you, and I love talking about this. And
yes. And thank you to everyone who joined us for the very first live. And it's not recorded because I have to pay more money to StreamYard to record things, which I didn't know. They're like, I'm like, oh, let's record this, and they're like, you need to upgrade your subscription. I'm like
right now before you do this thing. So thanks for coming, everybody.
Yes, thank you all for coming, and thanks for being here. And maybe we'll do something else in the future that may not necessarily be gay, but it could be something historically and all the things, perhaps. But, you know, especially because I know you're writing and you write your historical fiction. I'm always fascinated by historical fiction writers. So
it's so fun.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks, guys. See you all later. Bye, guys.
Bye.
Bye.